I hope I have sound. I had to make a couple little changes. Let's make sure. Output, audio, blue snowball. So I should be on now. Okay, there's a picture of birds in Costa Rica. And let's... So just a couple things. Talk about the Minoans. We're talking... I know you want to see more bull leaping. So here's bull leaping. And I hope everything is working now. It appears as though it is. I'm good, and you can hear my voice. That is so wonderful. All right, so just a couple minutes on this, and then on your own, I found this, it's kind of fun, you know. It's a little, about 8-minute video on Greek mythology, and I'll have a link to it, and I'll have the link on Teams. But it's just a little video because I thought it was a good way to cover Greek mythology, and it goes through, in a very hyper-dramatic way, all the Greek gods and how they came about, and it's a fun little story. But I thought that'd be a good way to do Greek mythology. So just do this on your own. So I'm only going to do a few minutes. I'll finish up the Mycenaeans, talk a little bit about the Battle of Troy, what we know. Bull leaping, we will have this as I understand it. This will soon be an event at school. So I'll start preparing, start prepping. And just a second, let me get my pointer set up. By the way, you might notice I am at home. And it's exciting. I can tell you're as excited as I am for this. And so it's kind of nice to be at home. Uh-oh, I went the wrong way. We have an empty slide. We showed this. We talked about the Mycenaean palaces. I think we have the Lion's Gate. Okay, so this is right where we quit last time, and just a couple things about this. The Mycenaean Age is in a lot of ways a mystery because of the destruction. And so we'll come back to what we know, but part of that is because of things like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which some of you might know about. So this is going to be this dark age of Greece that will go on till you can start seeing the emergence in the 700s BC. And so, as I mentioned yesterday, so the Mycenaean palaces were destroyed. Athens survived. Many of the survivors around that area moved to Attica, which is the area around Athens. Athens is a city. Its walls, or part of its walled city, survived. And Attica had the most population in Greece then. So they really see themselves, this will make them have this feeling, we are the roots of Greek civilization, which is not 100% true, but there's an element of truth there. So 90% of the population disappeared. Everything was lost. Trade disappeared, art, culture. But the thing about it is this appears to be a common thing throughout this era. The same thing happened in Egypt. The Hittites were destroyed. There were invading people. Could it have been the Iron Age and the end of the Bronze Age and that disruption because of that? It's really hard to say. Whatever happened was a catastrophe. There was a chance for volcanoes. I mean, there's a lot of things that could have happened. But we do know some things that happened that had to be an invasion by sea. Pylos is one of these city-states of Polis, we'll get to in a sec. And they had coast watchers. And coast watchers were there to watch for seaborne invasion. So clearly there was invasion. We know they were there because this is part of a tablet where it's written in linear B that warned of the destruction. It warned of the attack. Attackers are coming. And so it's clear that they were preparing for invasion and they were invaded and destroyed. This is part of a grain mill that in Pyros that was discovered in an archaeological dig of the destroyed city. It was completely devastated. Completely. So there was good evidence of this. So here's a map of the invasions, as we could see sweeping up through Greece, into Crete. Even now into Crete, it's just one of those great mysteries. And and the Hittites in Egypt. And as I said before, this is when the Sea Peoples attacked Egypt. They destroyed Hittites. This was a time of piracy, and pirate kingdoms would form. Some say that some of the first Greek colonizations were actually colonized by pirates. And it appears like it wasn't this massive wave of invasion that destroyed the palaces that were the centers of this civilization, but small, incredibly violent groups, raiding parties came in. I've seen, what I read about it is like the reputation of the Vikings in, let's say, 700, 800 in England. That they came in, these brutal invaders, took and destroyed. But you see right here, this is called the Dorians. It says right there, Dorians from right here. And so you see this called, oh, that's the Dark Age then. And this is the same time as the Iron Age. I thought I'd get the Dorians. We'll get to that in one sec. Hey, I got out of order. And the Iron Age clearly formed here. This is where you get people leaving Greece and going to Anatolia, which would become the Ionians. We mentioned them before with the Phoenicians. And here are the different groups coming in, and they would become known as the Greek people or the Hellenic people. We'll get to that in a sec. Helen, named after Helen. And a lot of times you see this called the Dorian Invasion too. And the Dorian Invasion appears as though people from this area up here became sweeping in to Greece and altering their culture dramatically. You'll see a different type of pottery. Here is an older style of pottery from Athens, but that pottery would change, writing would change, writing would disappear. This was just a time of great disruption. And you'll see it called the Dorian Invasion. This came about in the 18th century or 19th century, trying to explain what happened where you have Mycenaeans and then nothing, and then the Golden Age of Greece. But what we do know is going to come from this oral tradition. During the Dark Ages, talk of this glorious, heroic past as wandering minstrels. Minstrels were singers. They would come sing, tell stories with their songs, spread stories about Greek history. This would be a way for entertainment. They would make money off of it. You see a similar thing in the so-called Dark Ages after Rome fell in 700. And these are people with great memories, so they told stories. And one thing about this glorious and heroic past, they're going to greatly exaggerate the heroes and the traditions because that's entertaining. And so they find out what story works and they embellish the songs to match the popular opinion. But Homer, who would write in the 8th century, well, we don't know exactly about Homer. We're not exactly sure who he is, when he was born. We think somewhere in the 700s BC. Homer would become, in many ways, the poet of this dark age. And he would write about this glorious past with heroes as kind of an origin myth about the Greek history. And become the term of the 19th century to today would be a nationalistic hero. Look how great these people were. Which is kind of funny because most of the people in Homer's two main works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, make dumb decisions, rash decisions, or greedy or crude, but also heroes. And so at the end of the Dark Ages, they wrote this. And the important thing to understand is Homer is writing not so much about what happened in the past. He's writing for people at his time. This is why we are. And so he's trying to incorporate attitudes and values of their time into people in the past, which happens all the time. All the time. We do that. And so these epic poems would talk about the superhero of earlier in time. And so this is where you get this legendary history. Every people, they do this. It must be part of the reason why so many of the gods and the myths and the founding stories are all similar. Because every human has that same idea to embellish, and all humans seem to want this same story. They explain where people came from. They always embellish, like the great story of Hercules killing the Hydra. Yep. So, these epic poems. And by the way, if you read Iliad and the Odyssey, they are great stories, even though these people are just like dumb, do crazy things, but they're really hard to read. Oh, the Dorians were invaders from the north who would become the Dorian region of Dorians of Greece. And so that would be the generic name they give to this invasion that led to the Dark Ages. They would give them in the 19th century. So, the Iliad and the Odyssey, as I said before, these are the values of the late Dark Ages. And the thing about it was, in 700s, these cities are starting to reform, called polis. And they don't quite mean city-states. It means more like center, but we don't know what else to call them, and we call them city-states in Sumeria, etc. And these little towns were basically self-sufficient. There weren't a lot of trade, because remember, trade died in the Dark Ages. Insular means they're isolated. They're relatively isolated. And they were being led by this brave leader. And part of what Homer's doing is, we have this brave chieftain, king, you know, that you could say it that, but it's a little more complex than that. We have these brave, glorious leaders who are also make mistakes. And where did they get their start? From the past. So the way Homer's telling the story of, we're like this because of this. That's why it's not very good history, but it's good story. Here's a great painting of Homer. Let me go back. Let me go back one more time. This is Homer from a medieval manuscript from 1000. This is Homer's statue that would be done in Greece, of Rome, so Roman history. And this is great picture right there is Rembrandt. So Rembrandt would make this in the 17th century. And I really like Rembrandt, that kind of dark shade. Yes, the picture from I got from the internet and put on the screen is not going to be as good. But that mask is the mask of Agamemnon, who'd be one of the main characters of the Iliad and part of this whole story. He was the king of the Poli called Argos. This is one of the most famous masks. It's called the Mask of Agamemnon. They're not really sure if it is Agamemnon, but why not? And Agamemnon would be one of the main stories of the Iliad, and the Iliad would tell the story of the Trojan War. And, give me 1 second. Look at the birds. I got this a little out of whack. Sorry about that. I made a bigger slide than I cut and pasted and I forgot to move it. So let me get the pointer back. Pointer. Okay. Here is a Greek manuscript of the Iliad, and it focuses on the Trojan War. And I love that picture. You see the Greek below, the painting. That's a great, great picture. So, the Trojan War. And oops, I need a producer, like I said before. Okay, my mouse quit working. Give me a sec. I'm sorry. You get to watch the creative Okay, so sorry about that. Yeah, always got issues. You know, stuff happens. I accidentally got rid of my map. Okay. So I'm going to fast forward just a little bit, then come back to the Trojan War. Here's where Troy was. We're pretty sure Troy's right there. And these are the city-states. There's Argos or Agamemnon. Sparta was right here. Athens is here. So let's go back. So this is what's in the Iliad. Here are two frescoes from the Iliad. And in about 12,000 BC, we know there was a siege of Troy. A siege of Troy. And the story in the Iliad is this. Queen Helen of Sparta was kidnapped and taken to Troy. Agamemnon's brother was the king of Sparta, and so his wife was taken. And Paris, the prince in Troy, had gone to Sparta, fallen in love with Helen, took her back to Troy. It appears as though, according to the story, they fell in love. Melanthius, which is Agamemnon's brother, the king of Sparta. In fact, he was only king because of Helen. So he's like, oh no, I might lose my kingdom in Sparta. He went to Agamemnon and begged Agamemnon that our family's reputation is at stake, and we must get Troy. And so Agamemnon was to rally a Greek army of all the different polies in Greece to go to Troy, take Troy, bring back Helen. And here is the actual attack. These are Greek warriors getting off their boats and attacking outside of Troy. You can see right there. And we don't know. It seemed like Troy was actually besieged a number of times, but according to the Iliad, it was a 10-year siege filled with foolishness, greed, disruption. The most famous story would be the great Agamemnon's most trusted leader, Achilles, and his great fight with the great Trojan warrior Hector. And I mean, there's this whole elaborate story of these rude, terrible people, where Agamemnon stole Achilles' favorite slave, aka raped her. Achilles was mad, but then Achilles' best friend was killed by the Trojan Hector. So Achilles took Hector, and it's, in many ways, kind of a ridiculous story. I'll come back to Hector in a sec. Achilles would die because he was dropped into a sacred swamp, or a sacred pond, that by Zeus, the god that made him invulnerable to enemy weapons, but Zeus held him by his back of his ankle, and so that back of the ankle was not protected, and so a Trojan arrow hit him in the back of the ankle, and there he died, aka his Achilles tendon. Quick story about that. I don't know how much I want to tell about this story. It's ridiculous in many ways, but this is where you get the fabled story of the Trojan horse, where the Greeks said, we're leaving. Troy, you survived after a 10-year siege, and as a reward, we give you this horse, this monumental horse, as made out of wood, but as a tribute to your great victory. And the Trojans brought the horse in, and that is how the Greeks left. First off, let me show you. This is a picture from the 1800s of Achilles taking Hector's body after he defeated him and riding him around in this chariot around the walls of Troy. And here is the Trojan horse. And this is a couple different examples of it. Here's the Trojan horse, a very stylized painting. Here is from Greek art from around 500 BC. And here it's a Roman of the very small Trojan horse. And I think you know the story. They brought the horse in. There's celebration in Troy for their great victory. The Greeks had disappeared. yet they were hiding. And inside the horse were some of the best soldiers of the Greeks. And when the Trojans were all hungover and not ready to fight in the middle of the night, they fell out and attacked, opened the gate, Troy fell. The Trojan horse. Therefore, never trust anybody who gives you the gift of a horse. This great, dramatic story about Troy, and most people just assume this was a myth, even though there are elements of this, but this came after Hector's poems, so it's never considered to be true. Yet, as it turns out, it might be. Troy was discovered right here. And these are some of the ruins of Troy. And it appears to have gone through many sieges. So this was probably elements of a true story. Probably a short, bitter siege. Troy was destroyed, probably over trade, probably over those valuable islands in the Aegean. Troy did fall. This was true, and it shows you a lot about these epic poems. We get tidbits, bits of history, just enough to put it together, but it's hard to get the whole story because this was the Dark Ages. Now, we will emerge from that. But if you go to Troy, I've not been there. I know people who have. One of the most important battles of World War I is right here at Gallipoli. There are also incredible Greek ruins here. Constantinople. Now Istanbul is here. All the Greek ruins. It'd be an incredible place to go. That's a hint. I think we ought to hop on the yellow bus and go. But with that, the Dark Ages. That's a very good question August does ask. Why would the Trojans do that? Yeah, why would they do that? They took this gift. The story is that it was the hubris of the Trojans. They thought they were invincible after defeating this combined Greek army. We showed you, we killed your best soldiers. Agamemnon would go back home in disgrace. This was a glorious victory. And so the idea shows, it's a way to show how clever the Greeks were and how foolish the Trojans were, which were Ionians. But yeah, it's stupid. But it makes a great story. I did the hackneyed version of it. That's one of the problems when I want to try to get done. I don't want to tell too much. So this is going to be the end of the Dark Age. It will happen about 800. And you could really tie that into the Phoenicians, as we mentioned before. The Phoenicians started coming in, and with it, they brought, or the Greeks would adopt, the Phoenician alphabet, and they would adopt many of the advances that the Phoenicians had from ships, which ironically, the Phoenicians might have got some of that from the Minoans. And that is a Phoenician trading ship right there. And once this happened, once the Greek alphabet came in, the trade started coming in, they started recording history. Some of these isolated city-states become stronger. This is when Homer started writing this, and you start coming to the golden age of Greece. That would be personified by Athens and Sparta. And here you can see almost immediately, as they started expanding into farmlands, a population began going up. They started building colonies, maybe linking up with those who fled before the Dark Ages. But pretty soon you're going to have, as you can see, Phoenician colonies here, Greek colonies in Spain, and as I said before, we see instances of Greeks all the way up in Gaul, and Greeks as far as what is now Georgia and the eastern Black Sea. So, tomorrow, we're going to do the Golden Age of Greece, talk about that, hopefully do the Persian Wars. I don't know your reference. That's one problem. I don't know who Ms. Fizzle is. Should I know Ms. Fizzle? Should I look up Ms. Fizzle? But that's what we'll do tomorrow. Please have that read. I did assign that map. If you didn't get a map, if you couldn't print it, I'll hand them out on Tuesday or Thursday, I'm sorry, for B-Day. Oh! See, I don't know the cartoon, but I've heard of this. The Magic School Bus. When was that on? '86. Well, I was already old by then, so I missed it. But this is all right. Well, you know, we need a Magic School Bus. It's about time. So anytime in the next day or so, please watch it. Go check on Teens for that link. For that link on that little show on mythology. It's just a fun way to watch mythology. I love how hyper dramatic they are, but they got to tell you the story. And all I want you to do is just know the basic idea of how Zeus got power and the couple main gods. I'll finish that. The couple gods I'll finish up on probably maybe tomorrow. But if there's no questions, you can watch this on your own. Please check on YouTube. The link should be there. YouTube on Teams. Yeah, it's there. The Greek mythology stories, the essential, the origins. The videos are kind of funny. I just love how hyper dramatic they are. So, on that note, covered a lot here. And I will collect this tomorrow. So just take a picture. Please send a PDF of me. Easy points. Reward for you to watching. And I will see you tomorrow.